Not because the content is wrong. The equations are correct. The derivations are sound. The answers at the back of the book check out every single time. But something has been removed from the process, something so fundamental to how the greatest minds in history actually navigated the landscape of the unknown, that its absence has left generations of students solving problems they do not truly understand, using tools they cannot truly feel. What was removed is not a formula. It is not a theorem. It is not even a technique in the conventional sense. It is a way of seeing, a method of stripping the world down to its geometric bones and reading the answer directly from the shape of reality itself before a single symbol is committed to paper. To understand what was taken away, you first have to understand what a textbook actually is. A physics textbook is an archaeological artifact. It is the skeleton of a discovery, cleaned of all the flesh, preserved in formaldehyde, and labeled for easy identification. When you open a chapter on classical mechanics or electromagnetism or quantum field theory, you are not witnessing the birth of an idea. You are viewing its remains. The living, breathing, chaotic process by which that idea was actually found, the false starts and abandoned geometries and sudden visual revelations that preceded the final equation, all of that has been surgically removed in the name of clarity and concision. This is understandable. Textbooks are not meant to be biographies of thought. They are meant to convey established knowledge efficiently. But efficiency has a cost, and the cost, paid quietly over decades of standardized science education, is the loss of the most powerful cognitive tool a physicist can possess. That tool is geometric intuition. Not geometry in the sense of triangles and circle theorems. Geometric intuition in the deeper sense that Einstein meant when he described his thinking process, the capacity to construct a living mental model of a physical situation, to place yourself inside the machinery of the problem, to rotate it, compress it, follow its internal symmetries with your mind's eye before your hand has touched the page. Einstein did not arrive at special relativity by sitting down with a differential equation and grinding through the algebra. He arrived at it by asking a question so visually concrete, so geometrically precise, that it practically forced the answer to reveal itself. He asked what it would look like to ride alongside a beam of light, not as a metaphor, not as a poetic device, as a genuine thought experiment conducted in the theater of his own imagination. If you could travel at the speed of light, what would the electromagnetic wave beside you appear to do? Would it oscillate? Would it freeze? Would it even exist in any meaningful physical sense? And by sitting with that image, by really inhabiting it rather than encoding it symbolically too soon, he noticed the contradiction. He noticed that Maxwell's equations, which describe how light propagates, are incompatible with the assumption that you could ever be at rest relative to light. The geometry of the scenario itself was screaming the answer. You cannot ride a light beam because the very structure of space-time forbids it. And from that visual confrontation with the geometry, the entire edifice of special relativity followed. This is what was removed from the textbook, not the theory, not the Lorentz transformations or the relativistic energy formula. Those made it in. What did not make it in was the method of arriving at them, this process of sustained visual interrogation of the physical scenario, of demanding that the geometry of the situation speak before the algebra is permitted to begin. When you open a textbook chapter on special relativity, you will typically encounter a setup involving light clocks and reference frames, and then you will be handed the Lorentz factor and shown how to apply it. You are given the skeleton and told to memorize its shape. You are almost never shown how to grow the skeleton from scratch, using nothing but the physical intuition that the problem itself contains. The result is a particular kind of student who is technically capable but navigationally lost. They can apply the formula, they cannot feel the problem. And when a truly novel situation arises, one that does not resemble any template they have memorized, they freeze. Because the only tool they have ever been trained to use is pattern matching to solved examples. The deep method, the one that lets you approach a genuinely new problem without a map, is simply not there. So what does this lost method actually look like in practice? It begins with what you might call radical stripping. When confronted with any physical problem, the first move is not to identify which equation applies. The first move is to remove everything from the scenario that is not essential to the underlying physics. You strip away the specific numbers. You strip away the labels and the units and the coordinate axes that give you a false sense of having something concrete to hold on to. And you ask, at the most fundamental level, what is actually happening here? This is much harder than it sounds. The human brain craves the specific. It wants to know that the block weighs 5 kilograms and the incline is at 30 degrees and the coefficient of friction is 0.4. These specifics feel like progress. They feel like information. But in a deep sense, they are noise until you understand the geometry of the forces at play. Consider something as apparently simple as an object sliding down a frictionless incline. Most students, trained in the textbook method, immediately decompose the gravitational force into components parallel and perpendicular to the surface and write Newton's second law. That is the correct algebraic procedure. But the physicist who has been trained in geometric intuition asks a different first question. Where is the symmetry in this system? What is the most natural coordinate system? Not the one printed on the page, but the one that the physics itself is suggesting. And by rotating their mental reference frame to align with the incline, they find that the problem almost solves itself. The perpendicular forces cancel by inspection. The driving force along the surface is revealed by the geometry of the angle. The algebra that follows is almost trivially short because the geometric work has already been done. This is not a party trick. This is the fundamental habit of mind that separates those who can navigate genuinely difficult physics from those who cannot. The geometry is not a shortcut to the calculation. The geometry is the calculation. The symbols you write down afterward are simply a precise record of what the geometry has already told you. Feynman understood this at a visceral level. His famous diagrams were not just a bookkeeping device for quantum field theory, though they served that purpose brilliantly. They were an externalization of an internal geometric process. When Feynman thought about a scattering event between two electrons, he literally pictured the particles as trajectories in space-time, with photons as the mediating lines connecting them. He was thinking in geometry first and letting the mathematics follow from what the picture demanded. The diagram was not an illustration of the math. The math was a translation of the diagram. And this points to something profound about the nature of physical law. The universe, at a very deep level, appears to be geometric. Einstein's general relativity is not, at its core, a theory about force. It is a theory about the curvature of a four-dimensional manifold. Gravity is not a force that pulls masses together in the Newtonian sense. Gravity is the shape of space-time in the presence of energy and momentum. To truly understand why objects fall toward the Earth, you do not need to reach for a force equation. You need to visualize a four-dimensional surface that has been bent by the presence of mass, and recognize that what we call falling is simply the most natural path through that curved geometry. A path called a geodesic. The textbook will give you the Einstein field equations. They are correct. They are beautiful. But they are the endpoint of a geometric argument that the textbook does not typically walk you through. The argument begins with the principle of equivalence, with the profound recognition that a person in a freely falling elevator is locally indistinguishable from a person in deep space, far from any gravitational source. And by thinking carefully about what that geometric equivalence demands of the structure of space-time, Einstein was able to derive the necessity of curvature. The equation came last. The geometry was everything. There is another component of the lost method that is even less frequently discussed, and that is the role of symmetry as a problem-solving instrument rather than just a descriptive tool. In modern physics, symmetry is everything. The conservation of energy is not an independent law nailed to the wall of the universe. It is a consequence of the fact that the laws of physics do not change over time, a symmetry called time translation invariance. The conservation of momentum is a consequence of the fact that the laws of physics are the same regardless of where in space you conduct your experiment. Spatial translation invariance. The conservation of angular momentum follows from rotational symmetry. These connections, formalized in one of the most beautiful results in all of mathematical physics, show that every conservation law in nature corresponds to a symmetry, and every symmetry generates a conservation law. But here is the point that most introductory textbooks miss entirely. This connection is not just a mathematical curiosity, it is a problem-solving method of extraordinary power. When you encounter a problem and you identify a symmetry, you immediately know a conserved quantity. And conserved quantities are like handles on the problem. They allow you to bypass entire regions of difficult calculation by simply noting that a particular quantity cannot change. A student trained only in the textbook method will solve a complex orbital mechanics problem by writing out the differential equations of motion and integrating them numerically. A physicist trained in the geometric method will first ask what symmetries the problem possesses. Is the gravitational field spherically symmetric? Then angular momentum is conserved, and I can immediately reduce a three-dimensional problem to a one-dimensional one. Does the force depend only on position, not on time? Then energy is conserved, and I have another powerful constraint. By reading the symmetries of the scenario, the physicist extracts conserved quantities as naturally as reading words off a page. The differential equations are not even necessary in many cases. The geometry has already solved the problem. This is what Maxwell did with the equations of electromagnetism. The full set of Maxwell's equations looks formidable in its general form, but Maxwell was not grinding through the algebra blindly. He was thinking about the geometric structure of electric and magnetic fields, about how they thread through space, about how lines of force behave when you pass current through a wire or move a magnet near a conductor. He was constructing a geometric picture of the electromagnetic field as a real physical entity with structure and behavior in three-dimensional space. And it was from that geometric picture that the equations naturally emerged. The math was not the discovery. The geometric vision was the discovery. So why was this method removed from the textbooks? Part of the answer is practical. It is genuinely difficult to teach geometric intuition through a standardized curriculum. You can teach the Lorentz transformation to any student who has passed algebra. You cannot easily teach the habit of mind that Einstein used to discover why such a transformation was necessary. Intuition resists standardization. It grows slowly through practice and exposure and long, quiet periods of sitting with a problem and refusing to reach for the formula before you have truly seen the geometry. Part of the answer is historical compression. The history of physics moves faster than pedagogy. By the time a theory becomes stable enough to be textbook material, the messy creative process that produced it has been smoothed over in the interest of presenting a clean, logical derivation. The palimpsest of false starts and geometric struggles that preceded the final theory is simply not visible in the finished product. And part of the answer is cultural. Modern science education has, over the past several decades, become increasingly focused on measurable outcomes. Can the student apply the formula correctly to a given problem? Does the answer match the key? This is understandable from an institutional perspective, but it selects for a particular kind of competence that does not include the capacity to navigate genuine unknowns. The physicists who changed our picture of the universe were not the ones who were best at applying known formulas. They were the ones who had so deeply internalized the geometric structure of the physical world that they could feel when the existing framework was wrong. Einstein did not improve Newtonian mechanics. He replaced it. He was able to do that not because he knew more formulas than anyone else, but because he had developed such a precise and vivid geometric picture of physical reality that the cracks in the Newtonian structure were visible to him in a way they were not visible to his contemporaries who were closer to the algebraic surface of the theory. The question then becomes whether this lost method can be recovered, and the answer is that it can, but only through a specific kind of practice that most people have never been invited to engage in. It begins with refusing to reach for the equation. When you encounter a physical scenario, before writing anything, you must ask, what is the shape of this problem? Literally, what does it look like in your mind? Where are the forces pointing? What geometric objects are involved? Surfaces, vectors, curves in space-time. What stays constant as the system evolves? You must hold the problem in your mind as a living geometric entity before it becomes a set of symbols on a page. Then you ask about symmetry. Is there a direction in which the problem looks the same? If I move the system in time or space or rotate it, does anything fundamental change? Every symmetry is a gift, because every symmetry is a conserved quantity, and every conserved quantity is a constraint that makes the problem smaller. Then you ask about limiting cases. What happens in this scenario if one quantity becomes very large or very small? Physicists call this taking limits, and it is one of the most powerful geometric tools available. A formula that is correct must reduce to known, simple results in appropriate limits. And by asking what those limits look like geometrically, you can often read the entire structure of the solution without solving a single equation. This is the method they removed. Not from the curriculum officially, not by any deliberate decision, but through the slow erosion of practical pressure and institutional incentive. And what was left behind is a physics education that produces technically proficient students who are, in a deep sense, navigating the universe without being able to see it. The universe, as best as we can tell, is a geometric object. Spacetime is a manifold. Forces are curvatures and connections on fiber bundles. Quantum fields are operator-valued distributions on that manifold, constrained by symmetry principles that are themselves geometric in character. The mathematics that describes all of this is not the mathematics of arithmetic or algebra in the elementary sense. It is the mathematics of shape and transformation and symmetry. And to think about physics at its deepest levels is to think geometrically. Recovering that geometric vision is not a luxury. It is the method. It is the actual process by which the physical world has been understood, stripped away from every textbook that asks you only to remember the answer, and available to anyone willing to sit with a problem long enough to let the geometry speak.